In Alexandria, more than 140 officially sanctioned excavations have gone into the ground looking for a single man. When the land ran out, the search moved offshore, and divers began working the drowned seabed where a quarter of the ancient city now lies. In November of 1977, in a field outside the Greek village of Vergina, Manolis Andronikos broke through into a tomb that grave robbers had never touched and found a golden box stamped with the starburst of the Macedonian kings. In 2014, at Casta Hill near Amphipolis, archaeologists uncovered the largest burial mound in Greece, ringed by a marble wall 158 meters across and guarded by 2 sphinxes, and found 5 people scattered inside a robbed grave. And in Venice, beneath the high altar of a basilica, a body has been lying since the year 828. 4 searches, 2 centuries of effort, and in 2025, a team of scientists finally did the one thing nobody had done in 50 years of arguing. They ran deoxyribonucleic acid analysis, radiocarbon dating, and isotope chemistry on the bones of the Macedonian royal family itself. The result overturned everything, not because it identified someone, because it took a name off a tomb instead of putting one on. The finding was so unwelcome that a rival team of researchers, the same team whose identification it destroyed, published a formal rebuttal in the peer-reviewed literature almost immediately, arguing that the dates could not possibly be right. That argument is still unresolved today, and it means something most people have never considered. If the body of Alexander the Great were pulled out of the ground tomorrow, we could not prove it was him. Now, let us talk about what the bones actually revealed. Everything rests on one hill in northern Greece. The place is called Vergina now. In the 4th century before the Common Era, it was Aigai, the old ceremonial capital of Macedon, and it was where Macedonian kings were buried. Between 1977 and 1979, Andronikos and his team excavated an enormous artificial mound there and found 4 tombs underneath it, labeled simply Tomb 1, Tomb 2, Tomb 3, and Tomb 4. 2 of them had been looted in antiquity. 2 of them, astonishingly, had not. This is not a cemetery of strangers. This is the family cluster of the Argead dynasty. This is Alexander's own bloodline. And for almost 50 years, scholars fought over which box held which relative using nothing but the shape of the bones and the objects buried beside them. No systematic radiocarbon dating had ever been performed on any of the 4 tombs. No genetic work at all. The signs in the museum told visitors who was inside. The science had never been done. Then, in 2025, a project led by Yanis Maniatis of the Laboratory of Archaeometry at the Demokritos Research Center, working with an international group of archaeologists, chemists, geneticists, and historians, opened Tomb 1 properly. They took 24 samples. They recovered ancient human deoxyribonucleic acid from 23 of them. To understand why that number matters, you need to know where they were looking. Deep inside the skull, wrapped around the inner ear, sits a wedge of bone called the petros. It is the densest bone in the human body. Think of it as a safe built inside a vault. Whatever is stored in there is the last thing in a skeleton to be destroyed. They opened the safe, and the first thing that came out contradicted the sign on the tomb. The first result was the one nobody wanted. The man in Tomb 1 is not Philip II. For decades, this was one of 2 leading candidates for the burial of Alexander's father, the king who rebuilt the Macedonian army, broke the Greek city-states, and was assassinated in 336 BCE, clearing the road for his son. The radiocarbon dating placed the man in Tomb 1 somewhere between 388 and 356 BCE. He was already in the ground, and had been for at least 20 years, before Philip was ever murdered. The mechanism matters here, because radiocarbon dates on scattered bones are easy to challenge. The looters had thrown this skeleton around the chamber. So the team modeled the bones found still lying in anatomical position against the bones found loose on the floor, and ran the whole set through Bayesian statistical analysis. Everything resolved into a single depositional phase between 404 and 362 BCE. One burial event, one man, too early. Then the skeleton said the same thing a second way. Dental and skeletal assessment put him at 25 to 35 years old at death, and roughly 167 centimeters tall. Philip II was around 45 when he died, a veteran carrying a lifetime of battlefield injuries. The bones told a different story. Whoever this man is, he was young, he was important enough to be painted into a tomb by a master, and he has no name. And the second result was stranger still because it involved a baby. But the tomb was hiding something far odder than a wrong name. For years, the accepted reading of Tomb 1 ran like this: Philip II, his young wife Cleopatra, and their newborn infant, all three killed in the political bloodbath of 336 before the Common Era, buried together. It was a complete story, and the presence of infant bones in the chamber seemed to seal it. The infant bones are not from one infant. They are from at least 6 different infants. And they do not date to the 4th century at all. They date from roughly 150 before the Common Era to 130 of the Common Era. 400 years too late. In some cases, considerably more. The mechanism is grim and completely mundane. In 274 before the Common Era, Gallic mercenaries broke into the tomb, looted it, and scattered the bones across the floor as an act of contempt. That breach never fully closed. Maniatis has explained that the opening remained visible into the Roman period, and that Roman-era parents used it the way people have always used a convenient hole in the ground, to dispose of dead newborns. It was not an uncommon practice at the time. So, the most emotionally powerful detail in the entire tomb, the murdered royal baby, was never royal, never murdered, and never one baby. It was 6 of them, deposited by strangers, centuries apart. The bones told a different story, which left the team with one question: if he was not Philip, then who was he? And the answer was locked inside his teeth, and then the teeth spoke. The analysis showed that the man in Tomb 1 did not grow up in the region of Pella, the Macedonian capital. The woman buried with him did. To see why that is remarkable, you have to understand strontium. Strontium is an element that sits in bedrock, and its ratio varies from one geology to another. Rain moves it into groundwater. Plants pull it up. Animals eat the plants. People eat both. And when your adult teeth form in childhood, that strontium is built directly into your enamel in the local ratio, permanently. Bone remodels itself throughout your life. Enamel does not. Once it is set, it is set. Every one of us is walking around carrying a chemical postmark from wherever we happen to be a child. His postmark and hers do not match. She was raised near the seat of power. He was raised somewhere else, and was brought there to be buried in one of the most beautifully painted tombs ever found in Greece. This is also where the Petros bone stops being a technical detail and becomes a political problem. Sampling the otic capsule, the dense inner ear structure that yields ancient deoxyribonucleic acid at rates up to 50 to 100 times higher than ordinary bone, requires cutting into it. You destroy part of a national treasure in order to read it. In a monument as contested as Virginia, that is not a laboratory decision, it is a diplomatic one. The bone told another story, and the story was that these people were royal and unidentified and likely to stay that way, which raised the question the entire field had been quietly avoiding. Now, before the largest finding of all, here is the strongest argument against everything you have just heard. Antonis Bartsiokas of Democritus University of Thrace, working with Juan Luis Arzuaga of Madrid and Nicholas Brandmere of West Virginia University, published a comprehensive review in 2023 arguing the opposite conclusion. They say Tomb 1 is Philip II with his wife and child, and that Tomb 2 holds Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother. Their central piece of evidence is a fusion in the knee of the male skeleton from Tomb 1, consistent with the severe limp that ancient sources record for Philip after a war wound. That evidence is real. A fused knee in a royal Macedonian burial from that era is a genuine coincidence, and it does not deserve to be waved away. Bartsiokas and his colleagues have since published a formal review challenging the 2025 radiocarbon results directly, but a single pathology cannot outvote 2 independent lines of chronology. The radiocarbon says too early, the dental age says too young, and when the strongest counterargument in a 50-year-old debate comes down to one knee, you are not looking at a solved case, you are looking at an open one. Which brings us to the finding that ends the search. The 2 tombs at Vergina that everyone across the entire debate agrees hold Alexander's closest blood relatives were cremated. Tomb 2 held a cremated man and a cremated woman, each inside a golden box. Tomb 3 held the cremated and fragmented remains of a boy, aged 13 to 15, almost universally identified as Alexander IV, Alexander's own son by Roxane, murdered as a teenager in the wars that followed his father's death. Fire does not simply burn a body,
It shatters the deoxyribonucleic acid molecule into unreadable fragments and chemically cross-links whatever survives. The safe inside the vault does not survive a pyre. Nothing does. Think of it like a fingerprint with no database. You can lift a flawless print off a surface, perfect ridges, every detail intact, and it still names nobody, because there is nothing on file to match it against. The one human being on Earth who carried half of Alexander's genome went onto a fire in the 4th century before the Common Era.
So where did our certainty ever come from? That this tomb was a thing we could find and know. It came from the people who took the body in the first place. When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 before the Common Era, his corpse did not belong to him. It belonged to whoever was holding it. His generals decided he would be buried at Aigai with his ancestors. And then Ptolemy, one of those generals, hijacked the funeral procession on the road and took the body to Egypt instead. That was not piety. Possessing Alexander was a legitimacy claim, and Ptolemy used it to found a dynasty. The body went to Memphis first, then to Alexandria, where Ptolemy IV completed the mausoleum the sources call the Soma, the Greek word for body. For 3 centuries it operated as the cult center of a deified king in the middle of the greatest city in the Hellenistic world. Julius Caesar came in 48 before the Common Era and reportedly wept there. Augustus came in 30 before the Common Era, and then the same dynasty that built it began stripping it. As Ptolemaic power collapsed, they pillaged their own shrine for gold. Cleopatra took what was left to fund the war against Octavian that she lost. By the early 400s of the Common Era, John Chrysostom wrote that nobody knew where Alexander's tomb was anymore. Look closely at what that history actually is. The tomb was never a neutral archaeological object waiting patiently to be discovered. From the moment the hearse was stolen, it was an asset. It was built by people who needed it, visited by people who needed it, and dismantled by people who needed it more. It was consumed by exactly the politics that created it. Which is why every claim made on it since has arrived attached to somebody's interest. The Mosque of Nabi Daniel, the Alabaster Tomb in eastern Alexandria, the Oasis at Siwa, where Alexander himself asked to be buried and was not, and one claim that nobody has ever bothered to test. In the year 392 Common Era, Jerome mentions a tomb of Mark the Evangelist in Alexandria. That is the first time anyone does. It appears immediately after the Theodosian decrees, the imperial orders that made the destruction of pagan shrines legal and expected, at exactly the moment Alexander's tomb becomes dangerous to own and vanishes from the record. The historian Andrew Chugg has argued that these two facts are the same fact, that Alexandria's Christians saved the body by relabeling it, and the tomb of the pagan god king simply became the tomb of a saint and survived under a new name. In the year 828, Venetian merchants smuggled the body of Mark out of Alexandria, hidden under pork to deter Muslim customs inspectors, and installed it in what became the Basilica of St. Mark. In 1960, excavation in the foundations of that basilica turned up a carved limestone block showing a shield, greaves, a sword, and part of a spear. The style is Macedonian, a point made independently by Eugenio Polito in 1998, years before Chugg began this work. Chugg argues the block formed part of an outer casing for the sarcophagus carved for Nectanebo II, the last native Egyptian pharaoh. Nectanebo never used it. The Alexandrians revered it as the tomb of Alexander. It sits in the British Museum today. The body under the altar in Venice has never been tested. The church has not permitted it. But in 1980, the Patriarch of Venice, Cardinal Marco Say, opened that sarcophagus and removed 2 bones, the right ulna and a carpal bone from the right hand, and placed them in a gilded bronze reliquary which he kept in his private collection. He died in 2014. His family obtained the reliquary. A dealer bought the bones and stored them in a barn in Italy, wrapped in old vestments. In 2023, they were shipped to a parish shrine in Morton Grove, Illinois, where they sit in a display case roughly 40 minutes from downtown Chicago. The test has never been run, not because the bones are unreachable, not because the science does not exist, not because it has never been done before, because at that same shrine, the Oxford Relics Cluster radiocarbon dated a fragment of pelvis and placed it in the 4th century Common Era, consistent with the tradition of St. Nicholas. The test has never been run because nobody has asked, and here is the final cruelty. An ulna and a carpal bone are among the worst elements in the entire human skeleton for recovering ancient deoxyribonucleic acid.
The Petrus bone, the safe inside the vault, is still under the altar in Venice. The only bones anyone can actually reach are the ones least likely to speak.
So here is the thesis, stated plainly. The tomb of Alexander the Great is not a location problem. It is an identification problem. Finding a body was never the hard part. Proving it is. And the proof requires a verified relative that we no longer have, because his father is disputed, his half-brother was burned, and his only son was burned as a child. Now the honest part. None of this means the Venice theory is correct. Chug's case is circumstantial. It rests on a stone block, a suggestive coincidence of dates, and an argument from silence. It is a minority position, and most historians believe Alexander's body was simply destroyed in late antiquity, in the riots and earthquakes and rising water that tore Alexandria apart. The romantic detail that Alexander was preserved in honey comes from Statius, a Roman poet writing centuries after the fact, not from anyone who was there. Curtius, closer to the events, says only that the embalmers emptied the body of its organs and filled the golden coffin with perfumes. And an untested relic is not evidence. It is an open question, which is a much smaller and much less exciting thing. The claim being made here is not that we know where Alexander is. It is that there is a testable question sitting in a display case in Illinois and a second one under an altar in Venice, and we have chosen not to check either of them. Go back to Alexandria. Picture the divers again, working the drowned quarter of the ancient city, the permits, the sonar, the 140 excavations, generations of people convinced that if they simply searched hard enough in the right square of ground, the greatest missing body in history would be lying there waiting. Every one of them was looking outward. The obstacle was never out there. The search has always been geographic, and the problem was always genealogical. What makes a person identifiable is not the person. It is everybody they are connected to. A skeleton on its own is anonymous no matter how perfectly it has been preserved. It becomes a name only when there is somebody else to hold it up against. Alexander conquered from the Aegean to the Indus. He declared himself the son of a god at Siwa and demanded to be worshipped as one. He died at 32, and the boy who carried half of him was killed in captivity before he was old enough to have children of his own, and then placed on a fire. He did not merely lose his tomb, he ran out of relatives. The most recognizable man in human history made himself, in the most literal biological sense, unverifiable. He is not lost because we cannot find him. He is lost because there is nobody left to compare him to, which leaves a question worth sitting with. If what preserves a person is not monuments, not gold, and not conquest, but simply the people who come after them and carry something of them forward, then what are any of us actually building?